Okay, so I think we can start. People are going to connect throughout the beginning. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Good afternoon. In the name of Taleo, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar. Very rapidly, I'll leave Lydia, the moderator of the upcoming exchange, present the speakers and the topic. Just very rapidly, I will present a little bit Taleo, the host of this webinar, and the organizer. So Taleo is a consulting group founded by two brothers, Jan and Benjamin Ruva, in 2014 in Paris. Today it counts almost 300 people in 8 countries. Indeed, Taleo has grown in European countries and is now active in Paris, of course, Luxembourg, Brussels, Amsterdam, Geneva, Barcelona, and Lisbon. It has also widened its horizon by opening its first Asian offices in Singapore in 2021. Taleo specializes in the financial sector. Its main clients are financial institutions, so banks, asset management, insurers, fiduciaries, and our expertise covering not only business knowledge, but also project methodology. We also bring our services to companies from the industrial or telecom sector. On top of this activity, the group holds 2 other brands, so Elmea, a consulting entity focusing on the pharmaceutical sector, and Sapia, focusing on the green and social transition, of which Lydia is the best consultant. Talio's group main focus is to bring relevant knowledge and best practices to its clients to assist them in delivering projects and bringing added value to their business. With this in mind, we always strive to align our core of competences with market trends. Hence, regulatory topics have been at the heart of our development since our creation. We understand the necessity for clear, harmonized, and strong regulations, but also the stress the latter put on teams and more generally on organizations. In this regard, we believe that being proactive regarding our understanding and knowledge of the upcoming obligation also allows us to bring relevant and efficient assistance to our clients. So the regulatory landscape is shifting, and in addition to regulators, investors also now expect certain principles to be respected. And it is on this note that I will leave the floor to Lydia Raal, Senior Consultant at Sapia, to introduce today's topic. Thank you very much. Lydia, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Louise. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I would like to express my gratitude to Louise and Jan for letting me co-organize this webinar on a subject of joint interest between Taleo and Sapia. I hope everyone can hear us. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. We will be discussing the ESG in the financial world from different perspectives with a panel of experts, and we are honored to have them here today. I will let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. So we will be taking questions. Please feel free to type them in the question box. The Q&A part will be held after the speakers, or the speakers will have their word. So we've tried to build a schedule that brings together the main aspects of the environmental, social, and governance criteria. So let's introduce the subject in a few figures. The Global Sustainable Investment Alliance's latest report shows that sustainable investment across the global investment industry is reaching up to $35.3 trillion, with a growth of 15% over the last 2 years. At the same time, the Bloomberg announced that global ESG assets would have exceeded $53 trillion by 2025. So let's draw attention to the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The world is on course for the global average temperature rise by 3.2 degrees if no action is taken. It's necessary to put the world on track for the temperature to rise by no more than 1.5 or 2 degrees by 2100. So, ESG investing trends are expected to have significant positive impacts in the long run. This chart shows that the 5-year return concerning stock rover ESG portfolio for 20 companies was 113% compared to 108% for the Nasdaq 100 and 77.3% for the S&P 500. So, we are honored today to have Manuel Wechsler from the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institutes, Sofia Tsankova from PwC, Simon Pistilides, a GRI expert, Eva Heikant from Sustainalytics, and Eric Boremas from Pictet. Let's start without delay. So the first point of our today's plan covers the green finance trends, including the digitalization and some pieces of definition. We are happy to uphold this first point with Manuel. So I pass the floor to Manuel. So we have some troubles with Manuel. He's not able to connect. So let's start with the next person. I just have to skip all the presentation of Manuel. So the second point which seems to be important concerns the regulatory application. So currently there are harmonized regulations, and today we have an expert on those regulations. So Sofia, you're welcome to start your presentation, please.
Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm Sofia Tsankova. I'm part of PwC Switzerland, focused on the topic of sustainable finance regulation for financial industries. And today I will provide some insights on the very hot topic of SFDR, the so-called Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation in the EU, and how it is currently impacting the financial industry. So before going into the SFDR itself, it's worth to take a look at what is going on generally in the topic of sustainable finance, and especially in the reporting and commitments topic globally. So we see a massive increase of sustainability related regulation, but also on a lot of initiatives, market initiatives by financial market participants in the late years. And this trend is here to stay. From a global perspective, there are a lot of new commitments and working groups that address this topic for financial institutions, for example, and also for corporates more broadly. For example, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which tackles the climate disclosures, and more recently, the development of a similar nature-related task force for disclosures of biodiversity and nature-related risks and opportunities. This, among other commitments and other initiatives from the market, such as the PRI, the PRB, the PSI for the insurance industry, shows this strong tendency also from a market perspective to integrate sustainability more into the financial space in the financial industry. From a regulatory perspective, the EU is the leader. As many of you would know, the most regulation that is currently coming on the sustainability topics is coming from Europe. This is the leading party currently that is driving the sustainable finance regulation, but we also see other jurisdictions following with different types of regulatory expectations, especially in the topic of climate change, which is perceived as a very important also from a climate change or climate risk perspective. Now, if we go into Europe, two of the cornerstones of European regulation related to ESG are the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and the so-called taxonomy regulation, which are very interlinked within each other. So this is why I like to start with showing and demonstrating the linkage between these two and why they have to be viewed together in the end. So from the SFDR is a new regulation, or was a new regulation, not so new now, that entered into force last year. It's been applicable as of 10th of March 2021, and it addresses sustainability-related disclosures on different financial products and services in the financial services sector. And the idea behind SFDR is to provide more transparency to potential investors in relation to any ESG-related claims that financial products make, and to provide to prevent greenwashing that is perceived as a big risk generally on the market as well, and a big concern of regulators as well. So the SFDR is a purely disclosure regulation, and it is complemented by the so-called EU taxonomy, which is a groundbreaking classification system in the EU that actually defines what are environmentally sustainable economic activities. So the EU taxonomy is the language of defining what is sustainable, currently with the focus on environmental objectives. It has a very technical criteria with a close list of activities that could be environmentally sustainable. So it is recognized as really a set universal classification system in the EU. That's the language, what can be seen as the language for sustainability. So how they are interlinked? Well, the EU taxonomy in the end amends the SFDR by introducing disclosures related to these, the alignment to these taxonomy-related activities of certain financial products. So this is why they are very important to be taken into consideration together. Now, coming back to the SFDR itself, it covers a big variety of financial institutions and financial advisors, from MiFID II investment firms through insurance, certain insurance providers, and of course the whole asset management industry, with the funds being also in scope of the SFDR. And the interesting of the disclosure regulation is that it creates new obligations, both on entity level, but also on product disclosure level. And the idea is, again, to provide the investor or the potential investor with more information, more transparency on how the institution or a certain product is handling ESG issues and any ESG-related claims. And also, of course, to increase the comparability. So just to quickly mention what are the entity disclosures. On one side, affected institutions already now today need to disclose how they are integrating sustainability risk in their investment advice and also in their investment process. And how sustainability risk is considered in their remuneration policies. So there is a lot of emphasis on sustainability risk, which is a trend that we see among also other regulations such as MiFID II, UCITS and IFMD, and more broadly going into prudential disclosures for banks, for example, in the EU. Next to the sustainability risk itself, entities are also expected to disclose how, if and how they are managing the so-called principal adverse impacts of their investments. which are any negative impacts on sustainability factors. So this one really goes into how, in the end, institutions are managing the impact of their investment decisions and advice on the environment and also on social matters. When it comes to the product disclosure, the SFDR has different types of disclosures depending on the ESG-related claims of the product. And interestingly, the European Commission, but also many of regulators have been stressing out that SFDR is not a classification system. So the idea behind SFDR is to provide merely transparency, but not to classify products. On the other hand, we see a tendency on the market to have three broad types of products, depending on what type of disclosures are required. And the first one would be the normal non-ESG products that don't have any ESG ambitions. For these, they're also impacted. So there are certain disclosures that need to be done mainly on the sustainability risk side, but also on this principal adverse impact side. And then the more detailed disclosures are actually applicable to products that do have certain sustainability related ambitions. And then I'll quickly go also onto the next slide, where you can see the types of products that have this increased disclosure obligations. So on one side, products that promote environmental and social characteristics, and then the other category or other type of products are those that do have a sustainable investment as their objective. And currently, the SFDR is, like I said, already applicable. There have been already amendments to the existing disclosures in relation to these different type of obligations. But what is really important is that from the 1st of January next year, the technical standards in form of mandatory templates are coming into effect. So as of next year, a very detailed disclosure templates have to be filled in for all of these products that have some sort of ESG related ambitions. And it does it does contain a lot of details about the asset allocation, for example, regarding ESG assets, which again include transparency on the taxonomy aligned assets as well, and require a lot of preparation to do. And just to quickly touch upon the other important topic that I also already mentioned, which is the principal adverse impacts. This is a very new obligation as well, that comes in a form of reporting in the end on entity level, based on predefined indicators. And while it's a purely disclosure obligation, or at least it seems like that, it requires a lot of preparatory activities in order to be able to disclose these indicators that are already predefined. And they're very quantitative. They need to be disclosed by next year, but the obligation goes beyond the pure disclosure. It's really about providing transparency on how these negative impacts are managed. So any actions related to these indicators and to these negative impacts need to be disclosed. There needs to be a strategy around how they're managed, with actions defined, and so on. So it's a really challenging topic. A lot of obligations, and the industry is still preparing for next year. And with this, I conclude my part on the SFDR, and will be happy to answer your question at the end of the webinar.
And we'll thank you. And we'll jump right in if I can have my slides. Oops, that's not mine. I guess I have to go back to, and again, appreciate the patience with Vinmo and myself. I'm going to talk today about green finance trends and expectations. And I'll take a very direct approach because before even going very deeply in green finance, I want to make sure that we have a clear taxonomy. And we notice that about 50% of the people use interchangeable ESG and sustainability. And the other 50%, they think it's one and the same. So I'll try to clarify this today. If there is one point I would like you to take out of this presentation is please have a deeper understanding of the terms and the terminology and the taxonomy we use, because without that, we're really not communicating. It's not a language barrier, it will be the understanding barrier. So what I'm showing here is in the last 8 years, and especially in the last couple of years, there is a large movement of funds toward what is called green investing. And green investing covers both ESG and sustainability. And I'll explain later how these are different. But right now, when we're looking at sustainable, and let me repeat, sustainable green investment, we are looking usually at the investments through three perspectives. We are looking through what is called the triple bottom line, by the way. We are looking about people and the impact on people. We are looking at about the planet, the health, the impact on the planet that all the humans' activities, and in this particular case, the enterprise activities, are impacting on the planet. And of course, when we talk about free enterprises, when we talk about the need for profits, the need for finance, the profitability is also a key indicator. So quickly to repeat, there are really three different perspectives: people, the planet, or the profit, and the profits, which we also call the triple bottom line. And it covers environmental, social, economics, governance, and the financial technology, which I'll talk a little bit more details on the next slide. And as we move on, a little bit of history. 1971 was a very important year for defining what an enterprise is, what a capitalistic enterprise is, what is the relationship between the enterprise and the owners of the enterprise, which we call shareholders. And that came up under the dictum and an article by Milton Friedman, an economist which received the Nobel Prize. And his clear message to the enterprises was a singular, very focused message. And the message was the only responsibility of a management and the board of directors is to focus on the welfare of the shareholders. While this is important, Milton Friedman didn't really define short-term versus long-term impact on the activities of the enterprise. Why is this important for us today when we talk about finance? It is important because without a clear short-term and long-term view of the sustainability, the resilience, the survivability of the enterprise, we do not really serve the shareholders. Some years later came the ESG definition, and I'm not going to read each element on the slide. It's suffice to say that the enterprise it's now from a strategic viewpoint, positioned to take care on the impact on the environment, both on the inputs and the outputs of the enterprise and the production, on the social, including shareholders, including what we call it stakeholders, which are the employees, the families of the employees, the community where they operate, and the general impact on the sustainability of the people. And last but not least, governance, which includes diversity, which includes a solid governance, balancing the perspective between short and long term. Let me share very quickly a story, and I'll do that in order to try to put a really clear line between sustainability and ESG. As it says, one late Friday afternoon, a CEO of a large enterprise gets an urgent call from an important analyst. She wants to know what is new about ESG. Happily, the CEO pushes a button and sends the CSR, the sustainability report, and leaves. Monday morning, in his office, the CFO is already waiting there. And he has bad news. The analyst dropped the update of the ESG for the company. The shares started to slide. Investors decided to dump the stocks. So really a critical moment for the company for a simple confusion between ESG and sustainability. The sustainability report, of course, 150-page, very nicely pictured report, did not contain essential ESG measurements that the analyst could have used. So let's try to draw a little more clear line. When we talk about sustainability report, we talk about the inside-out impacts, how the enterprise impacts, how the enterprise is part of the ecosystem, including ESG, including environmental, social, and governance. On the other hand, the ESG disclosures are a set of metrics that are reported typically annually and aggregated in an ESG rating by rating agencies. Clear difference. Inside out, it's how the company impacts the environment, impacts the social, impacts the economics of a country, of a region, and of course, the global economics. On the outside, the impact of ESG is how the environment acts on the disclosure. A very simple model would be the relationship between humans and the environment. We are both impacting the environment, and of course, the environment impacts us. For example, when it rains, we take an umbrella. Let's continue a little bit and bring in the third element, and the third very important element, which is not typically included in sustainability and ESG, with some footnotes there. But really, digital transformation, it's another element that brings a very powerful impact on the companies. About 70% of the companies' digital transformation projects fail, and they fail primarily because they don't look at the impact on people, but also they have to consider the process, the technology, of course, AI, and so on, the strategy and the governance. So to keep in mind, there are three elements that should define the impact of a company, impact in and impact out of the company. Let's take a very quickly a look of an example of how a company manages green finance. And this is MasterCard. I'm sure everybody knows it. And MasterCard now ask all the employees to have in their KPIs ESG goals. And of course, these are connected to bonuses. So now the whole company as a whole, as an entire entity, will keep a watch on the ESG performance, on how the environment impacts the company, and how they should respond to a sustainable strategy. One other element, and of course we can spend hours talking about the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, but what I put here is the impact of fintech. Fintech, which brings to I think right now we have about 9 billion people, so probably about 4 to 5 billion adults which could use banking, and they do not have access. And through the impact of technology, they can access loans. I'm sure that some people in the audience are familiar with microloans, with microlending, and other impactful financial instruments that can be brought to people. And this is just one of the many examples we can bring about the relationship between digital transformation, fintech, and the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. So I talked a little bit about the need to have clear measurements and clear definitions. And us at the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, we started to look into that by putting a framework. As you notice around the framework, there are the 5 elements we talked in the presentation today. The economic forces, the digitalization, which is the key technology, AI, artificial intelligence, IoT, Internet of Things, underlining and underpinning the processes of digital transformation. Governance, which it's again in the focus for companies to be sustainable, to be resilient, and to have longevity, to live a long time. Environmental forces and social forces, we can spend again huge amount of time on presentations about them. And to conclude, I just want to introduce you very shortly to the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute. We are an industry consortium. We are a non-profit. We are connecting trendsetters enterprises to focus, as I showed in the previous slide, on the 5 elements of sustainability and ESG. In conclusion, please continue to separate ESG and sustainability in using the lens of financing, using the lens of green financing, and understanding that when you invest in sustainability, maybe you are not totally investing in ESG goals. When you are investing in ESG goals, maybe you're missing some elements of sustainability. And when you're investing in both, you still have to consider the survivability of the company and their process to digital transformation process that, again, it's a major trend in the industry. And I thank you very much. Thank you. I'm moving them, Simon, to your slides, but you have to take control from there.
First of all, the first of all, GRI has been around since 1997, so it's a pioneer of sustainability reporting. Secondly, GRI is co-constructing the CSRD. By learning how to report using the GRI standards, you will be investing in the skills needed to confidently address the CSRD for your own report and that of clients. Furthermore, GRI is used by 73% of the world's largest 250 companies. And globally, only the GRI standards provide a complete set of standards that can uniquely address all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Additionally, what's important to note, in a memorandum of understanding that was signed back in 2011 between GRI and the UN Global Compact, the UN Global Compact recommends the GRI framework as the framework to communicate information. And last but not least, GRI allows users to take sustainability action. So it's a 360 degrees sustainability action framework. Now, let's examine some of the key stakeholders for business success and examine why they are important for business success. We're looking at investors, top talent employees, business partners, clients, and regulators. So what do investors and supply chain partners want to see? First and foremost, they want to see how your company or organization will benefit from the transition to a green, sustainable, circular economy. Now, you might ask, how do you do that? Is, for instance, when we're talking about regulation coming into place and how emissions and how that will affect a company, it affects a company in two ways. It affects a company, first of all, with its logistics. Are the new vehicles which a company is investing in, are they able to sell those vehicles in years to come when it will be illegal to buy new vehicles using fossil fuels, yes or no? Is their logistic partners geared for that change, yes or no? Do you have a plan of action? And the same goes for every other aspect of sustainability. The question to ask is, are your competitors better prepared than what you are, gaining a competitive advantage? Now, if we go on to top talent, there was a research by a Big Four accounting firm which stated one of the biggest findings was that business leaders can win the loyalty of millennials by driving societal and economic change. Also, another research, 30,000 people in 60 countries, found that there is an accelerating growth of people choosing sustainable brands. Further to this, we have regulators who need to see that you have properly complied with the regulations put in place. So a few questions to ask is, first of all, does your sustainability report provide the foundation for strategy and communication? Does your sustainability report build trust by addressing the needs of all, and I repeat, all key stakeholders for business success, not just investors, everyone? Is your report a lean and easy to understand report? Why is this important? If a class of 10-year-olds can reasonably understand your report, you will have a broad reach. Now, why is this important? As we've seen earlier, we have all these key stakeholders for business success. Everybody is out there to get top talent, get clients, get more business. And you need to be able to address the concerns and needs of all these key stakeholders for business success. And you need to put that through in a way, communicate it in a way that they will understand. Yeah. So you need to declutter a report. You need to create a report that is easy to comprehend by all these key stakeholders. If a class of 10 euros, I repeat, can reasonably understand your report, you will have a broad reach. This does not mean that you do not have data tables, do not have information which investors or other expert users need. You need, though, to have levels of information which address all the needs of all your key stakeholders. Now let's go on to shared value and why this is important for a organization. Shared value is something that Professor Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School put forward. So as you see on the screen, shared value is not about personal values, nor it is about sharing the value already created by firms, a distribution approach. Instead, it's about expanding the total pool of economic and social value. So why do businesses need a healthy society? Is we have education, healthcare, and equal opportunity, which are essential to a productive workforce. Safe products and working conditions not only attract customers, but lower the internal cost of accidents. Efficient utilization of land, water, and energy, and other natural resources makes business more productive. Good government, the rule of law, and property rights are essential for efficiency and innovation. Strong regulatory standards protect both consumers and competitive companies from exploitation. Ultimately, a healthy society creates expanding demand for business. A business that pursues its ends at the expense of society in which it operates, it will find its success to be illusory and ultimately temporary. At the same time, a healthy society needs successful companies. No social program can rival the business sector when it comes to creating jobs, wealth, and innovation that improve standards of living and social conditions over time. I will give you an example of what do I mean by shared value and why is it important to try to identify where shared value is. And there is a methodology in doing this. How do you find where you can make a difference with SDGs while also achieving business objectives? So with CEMEX, what CEMEX is good, what CEMEX does, it provides building materials. It's a company which is based in Mexico, and it operates throughout Latin America. Now, this case study fits in well with Europe too, because we have housing in Europe, especially in the UK, which is old stock housing. It's not energy efficient. And we definitely need to improve on the housing in general. What CEMEX is doing is addressing an issue of housing in Latin America, in some areas, poor areas, where people cannot afford to build a house and they live in favelas, otherwise called shanty towns. So the approach of CEMEX was to have materials certified and easy to build, very much like a Lego approach. So they were training customers, clients, to use their materials, to put their materials together, create safe houses, energy efficient houses, and they were microfinancing clients to do so. By doing this, they were pushing ahead with their business objectives. They were selling, they were making profits, but at the same time, finding a way to address different SDGs and address the need of society to be looked after and not just treated as a ground to make profit. No business can be successful in societies that fail. And it is a joint responsibility of businesses and governments to make sure that societies are not failing for all the reasons which I mentioned earlier. So, with the GRI standards, what I am recommending is using the GRI standards as the umbrella framework, making sure that you're addressing all the needs of your stakeholders for business success, not just investors or not just clients, addressing all the needs, using the GRI standards, plugging in whatever other framework you might need or indicators you might need. That way, you will not have a reputational risk and you will not be greenwashing. You will have a complete report, a report that combines ESG, sustainability, or in any other way you would like to name it. It's a 360-degree report which properly addresses all the risks, inward and outwards. Thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic. Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for Valeo for inviting us to participate to this event. So my name is Eric Bormans, and I'm head of ESG for ICTE Asset Management. My role is to support all our investment teams covering many asset classes, from equity strategies to corporate debt and sovereign debt, also including multi-asset total return strategies. So really a broad spectrum of investment teams. We have more than 25 investment teams in total, managing close to 250 billion euros. So my role as head of ESG is to support investment teams in deploying an ESG lens when evaluating the risks, the investment risks and opportunities of companies and also countries, and to incorporate these findings into their overall analysis of whether it makes sense to invest or not, in order to have, in the end of the day, a more complete view of what those risks and opportunities are beyond the balance sheet and the P&L of a company. We also support investment teams in implementing what we call active ownership. in a nutshell, active ownership means, as a minimum, exercising voting rights at company meetings. We hold year in, year out, we vote at approximately 4,000 company meetings, obviously not in person, but through proxy voting channels. And that's a cyclical activity which takes place basically between March and June. So we're right in the middle of voting season as we speak. And last but not least, we also support investment teams and our other parts of the organization to report back to clients the ESG characteristics of the portfolios in which we invest money on their behalf. So it's quite a broad function, and it really covers all aspects of the investment chain, from data gathering to fundamental analysis, risk management, and client reporting. So I don't have slides. I think we've already have a fair amount of slides, and maybe instead of that, I wanted to share some thoughts on what's been said so far from an investor's perspective, starting maybe with the reporting element, and I'll come back to the green finance and regulatory evolutions that were covered earlier in this event. So on the ESG reporting slide, and maybe in response to some of the points made by Simon, and I agree with some and disagree with some. Yes, I do agree the view shared by Michael Porter and the need to have an enlarged view of the organization in relation to its investors, not only shareholders, but only bondholders and employees, local communities in which it operates, not to mention clients and the public at large. So that's definitely, we agree on that. On the reporting front, I mean, to be fair, we as an investor, we don't really use the GRI as an input to inform our investment processes. We consider that it is quite broad, or maybe too broad, and potentially covers too many issues. We do work instead with a number of ESG data providers or rating agencies, not one of them, but several, and that includes Sustainalytics, and which you will hear about more just after my presentation. But Sustainalytics is one of many, well, or at least one of several. I think it's fair to say that today there are two breeds of ESG data providers. On the one hand, you have what we would call generalist providers that cover or that provide high-level ESG ratings, including Sustainalytics, but there are others as well. MSCI or ISS would fall in that camp. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a range of specialist data providers focusing on an aspect that is very specific. For example, S&P Trucost has historically been the leader on carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, for example. Or more recently, we have seen the emergence of a startup that was more recently taken over by Moody's, and their name is 427. Their area of specialization is to try and quantify the extent to which companies are potentially exposed to extreme weather events or climate change at large. For example, water scarcity, heat waves, or droughts, or hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. So you have generalists and specialists, and over the years we have selected a limited number of data providers that cover the full spectrum, so that their areas of specialization helps us to build our own view of the investment risks or the ESG related investment risks and opportunities that I was referring to earlier. And that's, as an investor, this is absolutely essential. Obviously, not everyone makes that effort. Some investors have decided to work with one rating agency. We believe that it's a bit of a dangerous path to follow, because different agencies have different philosophies and different viewpoints. They have, as I said, different areas of specialization, but more importantly, the ESG data and ESG research is still very much in it's evolving. It's evolving fast, and we've seen over the last few years rating agencies that collapsed or that were taken over. And in other words, it means that relying solely on one source, beyond the fact that you are tying up yourself to the philosophy of one organization, it also means that, well, if something goes wrong, say that data quality deteriorates or that this organization disappears, well, then you have just created for yourself a massive operational risk. Because I mean, and that leads to my second point, which is that ESG data is something that needs to be handled from an investor point of view. At least from our point of view, it has to be treated as professionally as financial data, and that has consequences. It means investing IT resources in ingesting this data, in getting clarity on corporate structures. Companies go well beyond a single legal entity. Many companies have multiple legal entities, and you need to be able to connect all these legal entities together, so that if you get data on one legal entity from one data provider, then you can in some cases apply this same view to other legal entities within the group, and enrich the coverage of your investment universe. Broadly speaking, we buy data on 10 to 15,000 companies worldwide. We invest in approximately 10,000 companies worldwide through active and passive strategies. So that gives you an idea of the breadth of the universe that an organization like ours needs to cover. Obviously, this would be different for infrastructure or for private equity, where the number of issuers will probably tend to be smaller. But when you operate in listed markets across different regions, both developed and emerging markets, that's what it equates to. So ESG data has to be treated as professionally as financial data, and that comes at a cost. So the cost is more than buying the data. Then you need to treat it, handle it, ensuring data quality, store it, to get the history, to build up the history, and to get something useful out of it. So back to my initial point, no, we don't use GRI as a primary source of information, but we tend to use with a range of data providers, and we also tend to use specialist reporting platforms such as the CDP, which is an important source of information for us, because it gives further color to the extent to which a company today is exposed to potentially the rising cost of greenhouse gas emissions, but also to what extent this company is on a trajectory to decarbonize its business, its operations, its product mix over the coming years. As we know that meeting the Paris Agreement and aligning with 1.5 degrees global warming by 2100 means that we pretty much have to be net zero by 2050. So I mean, it's absolutely critical to understand which companies are on their journey, not only from a commitment point of view, but also from a practical point of view. So to what extent are capital expenditures being reallocated away from the brown to the green in a progressive way? So on reporting beyond the rating agencies, and I think to feed the the need for the investment community for high quality and or better quality ESG data and standardized data, we, at least in Europe, have high expectations as a result of the implementation of the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, because that contains a number of obligations, at least for European companies, to report more systematically on a limited number of data points that, in actual fact, are critical for us because, as Sophia hinted at earlier, we as investors are also facing more stringent requirements on transparency and in providing investors with more systematic reporting on a specific set of metrics. And those metrics fall into two camps. You have, on the one hand, what Sophia referred to as the principal adverse impacts. It's basically a set of 40, 50 metrics, of which a handful, say around 15 metrics, are mandatory. The rest are voluntary. But it's a bit of a game changer in the industry because, I mean, I've been in sustainable finance for the last 20 years, and prior to that, I actually worked as an environmental consultant for another 10 years. So I've spent pretty much all of my career in sustainability, starting in '92. That was the Rio Summit. But we have seen on the sustainable from an investment point of view, a massive, absolutely massive evolution from the early 2000s, where well, I mean, we were not talking about ESG at that time. We were talking about SRI and ethical investment. So things have evolved, but I think more importantly, the regulatory framework has become much more stringent, which I think is a good thing because it will bring some order in helping investors see through and compare investment strategies against one another, not only in terms of their ambitions, but also in the terms of the concrete results that they are able to achieve. So in that respect, yes, SFDR, Article 8, Article 9 apps are becoming really the norm in Europe, and fast. On our side, yes, we have approximately 3/4 of our funds that qualify to either Article 8 or Article 9. And we do observe that basically, if you want to collect assets, you have to be Article 8 or 9. The flows going into Article 6 strategies is definitely behind what we observe in Article 8 and Article 9. I think another element of reporting, or another reason why we do need, as investors, better quality data is because we'll have to produce, starting next year, periodic reports at portfolio level, but also at entity level. So how carbon intensive are our 250 billion, for example. But we'll also have to report at portfolio level something that I'm not sure was mentioned. It's the European ESG template, or so-called EET. Look at the EET as a catalog of 600 fields that characterize the ESG-ness of an investment strategy. 600. 3 years ago, there were a handful of fields, maybe less than 10. So we've gone from very little to quite a lot. Maybe it's a little bit too much, but fine. We'll have to live with it. And this, I think, this data will be used mainly by distributors, by banks, or by insurance companies who distribute funds to end clients and will help them ensure that the sustainability appetite that investors have, or the lack of sustainability appetite that investors have, is matched by what's on offer. So that basically, if you want an electric car, you're not being sold a hybrid car, or let alone a diesel car, and vice versa. So the last point I wanted to make maybe is about SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals are still today much talked about, both by companies and by investors. I think I'd like to maybe give a bit of a word of caution on SDGs and claims that a company is in line or is contributing to SDGs, and the same for investors and funds and investment portfolios. Why? Because number one, let's not forget that SDGs were first and foremost designed by countries for countries. They were not designed for the private sector. That came afterwards, when companies realized that SDGs cover such a broad spectrum of issues, from water to public health, to the strength of institutions, that, well, pretty much no matter what you do, whether you manufacture wind turbines or even tobacco, you have the possibility to claim the SDG high ground. We have seen tobacco company claiming that they actively contribute to the SDG on public health. Well, why? Oh, because they are shifting away from burning tobacco at 800 degrees to vaping, which is less harmful, thereby contributing to public health. I think that's very kind and interesting. So there is a bit of an SDG mania, or I would even call it SDG washing, going out there. From our point of view, of course, we do explain when we can, and within the limits of the exercise, the extent to which a portfolio is invested in companies that are more into one SDG or the other, such as water or clean energy, for example. But that's as far as it goes. We don't tend to use it as a reporting metric or an impact metric, because we believe that there are more accurate metrics available out there, or on their way to become market standard. I refer back to the principal adverse impacts when it comes to negative impacts, but also to the taxonomy alignment, the green taxonomy, at least today, which are hard, concrete metrics that we believe are probably more reliable ways of comparing portfolios against one another. So I'll stop here. I hope that I provided some useful remarks on what's been said from an investor point of view, and maybe hand over to Eva.
I guess that the SDGs are more useful at the governmental level, but not at an organization level. It's my point of view. Thank you very much, Eric. So, data providers, data providers as MSCI, ISS, ESG, and Sustainalytics are covering 60% of the markets. So the last point, will be addressed by Eva Heikens. So Eva, you're welcome.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you for all the other speakers of introducing the topic so well. I'll try in the last couple of minutes to connect some of the some of the concepts that we've been hearing. So there's a lot of mention of different frameworks, different types of ways of defining ESG. So I think one thing that we can take from this day or from this webinar is that not all ESG was created equally. And as Eric also mentioned, there has been a long evolution also over the last couple of decades of how we see ESG and what types of things we have been measuring and what types of things we have been reporting on. And Sophia very helpfully introduced already the SFDR regulation, the taxonomy, what the principal adverse impact indicators are. And so both Manuel Wexler and Simon have already talked about a concept that I think we can group and refer to as a double materiality. So I'll touch on a few of these points. First of all, maybe to tell you what my role is. So I work at Sustainalytics, and I am an advisor in our Paris-based client relations team. So I work with people like Erik Bolmans or asset managers and people working for banks to help them identify the right types of information and to influence their investment decision making, and especially with related to their in relation to their responsible investment strategies. So Sustainalytics has been at the forefront for over 30 years in developing high quality, innovative ESG solutions that meet these changing demands. So what our services do, so we have things called ESG ratings, right? So where we provide different levels of how companies are doing compared to other companies, or how countries are doing compared to other countries. We have detailed research and analysis, and we also engage in something called engagement services. So we dialogue with companies to help to improve and to reach better industry standards and to move sustainability to the next level. And so the reason for doing that is that we want to provide services as a one-stop shop. We want to provide services across the investment value chain. So that's as you see on the image, starting from pre-investment to all the way to post-investment. And with pre-investment, we mean if you're looking at an investable universe, all of the thousands of companies that you could be investing in, maybe selecting already a few to avoid investing in certain products like controversial weapons or tobacco, or maybe to look at international norms and standards like the GRI, like the Global Compact that was already mentioned, and to reduce your investable universe that way. During investment, we provide all kinds of research and ratings to understand what reality a company is facing. So Simon talked about these, the competitive advantage, really the landscape of what is best practice and how is a company responding to the environmental, social, and governance risks that are surrounding it. And during that process, we also provide those engagement services. So really searching for the dialogue with the company, and it also includes voting recommendations, so voting on shareholder meetings. And then when we go to post-investment, so that can include the voting, but also reporting. So really showing what are the outcomes of this investment process, and what does it mean for society, and what does it mean for the environment? So how much pollution is a company creating? What are the negative impacts, but also what are the positive impacts, and how much of the money is going to real solutions for the problems that we're facing. So we talked about that not all ESG is the same, and there are different definitions for things you want to be doing. And I think one of the most important starting points is the why. Why are investors sending all this money to what they call ESG solutions, and what is it that they are trying to achieve? And most of these motivations can be categorized in those sort of larger three buckets. Usually also investors will have a mix of motivations, but they can be categorized in this way. So if we start from left to right, then the values alignment would be really those investors that say, you know, I don't want to be associated with products or activities that are not helping the direction that I think we should be taking with the economy. So you could say, I don't want to invest in fossil fuels. I don't want to be associated with those. It's very, we can think of an health insurance company that doesn't want to invest in tobacco because it shows the wrong image. And also they just don't, that is just not how they want to make their money. Or companies in general, excluding companies that are violating international norms and standards. So here we provide a number of different research, insights, ratings, including product involvement and looking at those global standards. Then the sort of the second step, which often builds on top of that first, okay, we exclude those kind of investments and we make sure we invest in companies that aren't violating any international norms and standards. The second step is, okay, but what is the comprehensive view of all the risks and all the challenges that a company is facing? And how are they approaching that, and how are they managing that? And there it can really be a way of fundamentally analyzing the risk and the opportunities in a portfolio. And so here are our ESG risk ratings, and several of our other research solutions are often used. And then the third motivation, and that's something what I think people coming to ESG often think of the first, is how can you actually create impact? Because not investing in fossil fuel companies does not necessarily lead to a better world as long as those stocks are being held by other owners. So in the impact side, there's investors asking themselves, how can we actually influence the impact that's created in a company? That can be through engagement or to really monitoring certain indicators. Could be like the principal adverse impact indicators. It could be the taxonomy data that we've talked about, to measure, is the money really going towards solutions for climate change mitigation, for example. And there will be the end investors that would like to see what the outcomes of their investments are. So how much pollution is a company creating? How much what is the diversity of men and women in the board? What is the carbon emissions, and what is the water use of a company, for instance? So now that we think about those three different motivations that an investor might have, let's look at how that has evolved also in the history. And I think what I want to show with this is that eventually where we end up now with SFDR that Sophia mentioned, with the EET template that Eric mentioned, is sort of a combination of everything that has gone on before we arrived at this point. So when ESG and responsible investment was still very much a niche, there were certain ethical investors that would mostly try to align their investments with their values. So exclude thermal coal, exclude tobacco, exclude controversial weapons, look at those international norms and standards. But that would be kind of the more simplistic way of just investing in what they thought was ethical or not ethical. Then with ESG becoming a more important movement, we had those ESG ratings, such as the ones that are created by Sustainalytics, where we look at, okay, so what is it that a company can do to improve their performance in environmental issues, social issues, governance issues? And there we looked mostly at things that were best practice. What are the programs and policies that can be in place for a company? to improve their performance on those issues. But it was still very much a mixed bag of different indicators, different type of factors that we were looking at. So risks, opportunities, sometimes mentioning materiality, and best practice. So with the mainstreaming then of ESG, and I think we can speak about mainstreaming because most international and larger institutional investors have teams now that look into ESG data and have many different responsible investment products. So with this mainstreaming, it became more important to clearly measure what it is, or to clearly say what it is that we measure. So instead of having this mixed bag of different indicators, different programs, and different policies, we now want to have a very clear measure of what is the environmental, social, and governance risk that a company is facing, and how well is the company managing that. And that is what we at Sustainalytics measure with our ESG risk rating, launched in 2018. And it helps to have this deeper understanding, and already have a view also on what we mentioned around double materiality, right? So I think Manuel called it inside out, outside in, where the society has an impact on the company and the company has an impact on society, but also the company has an impact on the environment and society, and how does that influence the company's bottom line. So talking about risk as in financial risk stemming from those environmental and social and governance issues. And so that is where we look at what is the exposure that a company is facing, and this creates more relevance in the issues that we're measuring. So we can think about where we used to look at water use, for example, for banks and for agricultural companies. Instead, the exposure of an agricultural company to water use and to water risk is way higher than for a bank. We can say that even if a bank doesn't have very good policies on the water, on how they use the tabs, it won't be have such an impact as the agricultural company. But corruption, on the other hand, is a really, really important issue for a bank, because it can destabilize certain economies if the bank is large enough. So there we also place a level of relevance on the type of issue through this lens of materiality. And we saw that quickly after that also the standardization, so TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the SFDR regulation that we've talked about, labels, sustainable finance labels, all take in this approach as well of measuring sustainability risk and referring to double materiality. So that is a concept that is there to stay. And then on top of that, with the launch of the SDGs in 2015, and the bigger demand from end investors to really see what the outcomes are of their investments, the impact pillar becomes more and more important. So retail investors versus institutional investors maybe don't have these teams in place that can look at all the different ESG factors, all the different analysis, but rather want just to have some clear evidence on what is the impact of this investment and how much water is being used and how diverse is this company, how many men and women are there are working there respectively, and what is the pollution and what is the carbon emission that the company is providing, and are the carbon emissions going down. So that is the impact section, and there the principal adverse impact indicators and the taxonomy data is also added to that. So taxonomy is the money going really to the solutions for climate change mitigation and other objectives in the future. So I thought I was on this slide already. So bringing that all together, so from right? Ethical values alignment to ESG performance to double materiality and risk, impact. And all of this then comes together with this regulation, and not only the EU action plans part that we talked about, so SFDR and taxonomy, but also the EET that Erik talked about and MiFID II, the amendments to MiFID II are really articulating this final piece of the puzzle. So the EU action plan for sustainable finance, and that's what we started talking about, has three objectives. First is increasing disclosure rules, creating more transparency and comparability in sustainable finance. So looking at those principal adverse impacts indicators and the taxonomy data. Then secondly, the objective is to influence fiduciary duties so that sustainability risk is integrated into financial or investment management. And that is covered by SFDR and by the MiFID rules. And the third one is articulating sustainability preferences of the end investors. And this is a really interesting one. So on the screen here, you see there are three different preferences that the end investors can use to talk about. So we have a category called A, B, and C, where A means the percentage of European taxonomy alignment. So how much what percentage of the investment fund is going to green solutions as identified by the taxonomy. B, what percentage of the investments is going to sustainable investments in general. So that can be environmental, but it can also be social. It can be taxonomy aligned, but it can also be broader than that. And then C, what consideration of principal adverse impacts is taken into account in the management of the fund, both from a quantitative perspective and from a qualitative perspective. What is so great about this final piece of the puzzle is that it influences, so it brings together all those different points of information, and it makes responsible different actors of the financial market. So not only the end investor, not only the manufacturer of the fund, but also the distributor of the fund. So it affects both the distributors and the manufacturers of financial products via this target market identification and the distribution strategy. So within the target market identification, a fund manufacturer has to make sure that it is integrating the sustainability preferences relating to those three categories into its fund. So it might do some reverse engineering to see what the actual impact of the financial product is today, and then communicate that to the final distributor so that they can communicate it to the end investor. And that way, it underlines how important it is for distributors and manufacturers to become more ESG literate and to understand what it means and how their financial products are positioned in relation to those different indicators and data points. And it will create an opportunity for those asset managers and financial product manufacturers to really set their product out and position it based on those criteria. So finally, I want to conclude with saying that yes, this double materiality concept is here to stay. So there is always some mention of sustainability risk, and it can't be mixed with opportunities. It has to be sustainability risk. That is going to be important in all type of investment management, and then this impact point of view and the taxonomy alignment and the principal adverse impacts are going to add the additional nice light on the impact side. So thank you. That is what I wanted to add to this part. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Regarding measuring sustainability, risk, and the double materiality. So, thank you all of you for your colorful and pertinent presentations. Let's start with the questions. My first question is addressed to Manuel. I hope that he is still with us and he can hear me. Okay, Manuel. So, the major challenges for companies are digitalization and alignment with the objectives of the net zero emissions. What are your tips for integrating the two objectives in the most efficient way possible?
There is no generic tip, as we say, digital transformation is a journey. It is a journey together with ESG. It is a journey together with sustainability. The failure points are usually pointing to cultural change and to bringing the culture of the company along with the transformation process, to bring the new business models. So when you think of digital transformation, I think of it as being a three-leg stool. We all talk about technology. We all know about AI. We know about IoT. We know about flying drones and electric cars. So that's clear. And this is the top of the mind of executive and board of directors. However, what we're missing is digital transformation. The transformation part, it's a total company transformation, the same as aligning the company with the triple bottom line, aligning the company with the ESG goals. The transformation has to start with a new business model, with understanding the business strategy for transformation, continuing with how you bring the people along, your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, how you communicate with them. So, short answer, there is no magic formula. It's a process. It's a process in evolution, and it has to be integrated. And that's where AKFI came with the 5 forces model, 5 forces of sustainable development, because we need to factor all this together. And we're looking a little bit like in a kaleidoscope. We have to look at each individually and how they play together.
Yes. Thank you very much, Manuel. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, my second question is addressed to Sofia. I hope that she's able to hear us. Sofia, in 2020, the European supervisory authorities launched a joint public consultation of draft regulatory technical standards for ESG disclosures. PwC gave an opinion on this consultation. Do the results meet PwC expectations? Are you able to reply to this question or not? In a general way.
Yes, well, I think it is referring to the. I'm not sure on which technical standards the question is referring, but generally, we as PwC are very much looking into all types of different regulatory technical standards for all ESG disclosures, because obviously this is a big topic also from an auditor side. And we do see movement on the market to try to have a consolidation, or at least a kind of similar types of disclosures. Also internationally, we see, for example, the new CSRD directive, which is also trying to set standards aligned with already internationally recognized standards. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Sofia. So my third question is addressed to Simon. Simon, do you think that an association between GRI and another ESG reporting framework, like for example the CDP, will be founded in the near future?
There is a movement to align frameworks, and there's linkage documents and so on and so forth. I think what we should focus on is the value to the company and the value to the society and the world in general. The reason I always propose GRI as the umbrella framework is because you are addressing at a 360 degrees all sustainability matters, and you're able to form proper strategy, and you're able to look at the needs of all your key stakeholders for business success, as I mentioned earlier: top talent, um, your investors, your clients who are making decisions on a professional and personal level, and so on and so forth. So I think on the one hand, we should take a step back and see, why are we doing sustainability reporting to start with, or ESG reporting? Yeah, what is the reason? And the reason I recommend the GRI standards is because you can cover all the needs of all your key stakeholders for business success, and you can plug in, as and where needed, other frameworks. So if there's something which is very
So,
useful for investors, you will plug it in. If it's something that is very useful for the company, for their clients, like science-based targets initiative, you will plug that in. Now, this is the one level. It's creating a report that's an all-round report that will not be seen as a greenwash. Yeah.
of
So,
course, yes.
in my view, it's not about looking at the different frameworks, if they come together or not, or how well they work together. They do work together. Different frameworks work together. And my strong view is, if you use the GRI standards, you are addressing all the needs of all your stakeholders at the same time. So this is the one aspect of sustainability. The second aspect is that we are in a very complicated world. Yeah. We're in a very busy and complicated world. There's more people on Earth now, in some estimates, since year zero. So simultaneously, we have more people on Earth now. It's not a bad thing. We just have to do things in much cleverer ways. And we should not just focus on what is in it for us. And why do I say this? Is companies have been very successful and have been and are still around, like for instance oil and gas companies, while they have been creating havoc. Yeah, and it's generally accepted. It's not something I'm saying. Yeah. So business success is extremely important, but it's also important that in the complicated world we're looking at, is that we understand through double materiality all our impacts. We try to see where shared value is, not just look at SDGs and say, okay, we have 1 to 17, what do we choose, and so on and so forth. We use good methodology to address SDGs, just like CEMEX has, finding where the issues are. These are it's publicly available on the UN website, to know what the issues are, where the issues and what the challenges are for each country. this is publicly available. Yeah. So it's about strategy. It's understanding how to achieve profit
Yes.
by also addressing the SDGs in a proper way, just like CEMEX does.
Yes.
And by seeing it with this, seeing things this way, and not just seeing it very narrowly, and seeing, what is it in for investors, and are we making profit, yes or no? It's trying to expand value, trying to build societies and maintain societies, which all companies are relying on for growth and profit, which are societies which are not failing. And the way to do this is to see where those issues are lying, understand the unique strengths of a company, understand what a company is good at, what its mission is, and then try to combine the two. That's where the magic happens.
So
And that is what is good for everyone on this very complicated and busy planet we're on. Otherwise, we're building a Tower of Babel. Everybody's looking at their narrow interests, am I making good investments, profit or no, yes or no, and things like that. And you're looking at things very narrowly. We should take a step back and see how we are doing this in a proper way for the good of societies, planet, business, everybody.
thank you very much, Simon. We can speak about this for hours for sure. So the key words are the shared value, people, planets, and profits, of course. Thank you very much,
Absolutely.
Simon. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So the last question is for Eva. Yes. Hi, Eva. So toward which categories of data do you think Sustainalytics should evolve in the future?
On which categories of data we should evolve?
Maybe
Well, we
what
have
is lacking. Sorry, yes.
been evolving a lot, I would say, over the past few years. Not only in general with the new ESG, well, it's not new anymore, but in 2018 with the ESG risk rating and the way that we look at ESG, but also with the increased regulatory pressure, we've been developing solutions faster than we ever have. So looking at those new indicators proposed by the European Commission, we've really increased our analyst team and quickly got together a large team that is looking at all the indicators that are required by the regulation, looking at taxonomy data. And I think one of the things from the taxonomy data that is going to be really interesting for the world of ESG is that we're moving away from only looking at revenues. So what revenues is a company getting from a certain activity or a solution, but also looking at the capital expenditure. And what you can read in capital expenditure is what is their intention to move away from the fossil fuels, the categories from our old economy, and put money into the solutions of the future.
Yes.
So that is going to change the way we look at ESG.
Thank you very much, Eva. So I guess that we are coming at the end of the webinar. Thank you to all those who followed us today, and a big thank to to all the speakers. We hope to organize webinars on the ESG topic in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Taleo and Lydia, for organizing.
You're welcome, Manuel. Thank you.